I got some bad news for y'all. There's this new problem with furry conventions that I really need to talk about. And we're not talking about any specific convention or any specific location that's problematic. No, this issue affects almost every furry convention that you could possibly think of. Yep, I'm talking about scammers, specifically convention hotel room scammers that have been on the rise recently, targeting furries with empty promises and deals that are simply too good to be true. But as with all scams, they are avoidable, and if the fandom as a collective can attack this rising problem, we may be able to stop it from growing along with the growing population of furries looking to have fun at furry conventions. So let's take a look at why hotel room scams are happening, what they look like, and how to avoid them from swindling you out of potentially hundreds, if not thousands of dollars. But before we get too far into things, you might be curious as to why I'm making this video. In fact, this might be the first time you're hearing about hotel room scams affecting the furry fandom in the first place. And if that's you, I get it. I was the same way and only heard about the rise of these scams very recently. Actually, it was at a panel at the last convention that I went to. And I'll be honest, it was a little confusing to me at first because it was something I never really even thought about. I was under the impression that despite how frustrating it can be, everyone more or less understood the luck that goes into getting a room at the main hotel at a furry convention and knew some alternatives to take if they didn't get one. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense that people in this fandom could fall victim to these scams, and why there seems to be a recent spike in furries getting scammed in this particular way. First of all, I don't know if you've noticed, but the amount of furries going to conventions is accelerating each year. Almost every furry convention around the world has seen its attendance numbers spike in recent years, as more and more furries have taken the opportunity to check out a convention. And while that growth is great, one thing that hasn't grown at nearly the same rate is the amount of accommodations to handle this sudden increase. Signing contracts to get discounted rates at hotels for conventions isn't something cons can just whip up in a year. There's a lot of paperwork and negotiations that goes into that process. Now, some cons have done their best to address this as quickly as possible, but for the most part, while the attendance numbers have increased at cons, the number of rooms to hold everyone hasn't kept up. And you don't need an economist to tell you that when the number of people outpaces the number of things that those people want, the demand for those things start to rise. This has turned hotel rooms at furry conventions into a pretty hot commodity, making some people in this fandom absolutely desperate to get a room at a con. And unfortunately, people who like to take advantage of desperate people have realized this and have turned the prized hotel rooms at a con as a way to lure people into being scammed. It really is unfortunate, not just due to the scamming part itself, but who they are specifically choosing to target in those scams. These people know that there are a lot of younger, more excitable members in this fandom who may have found friends and built a sense of trust in this community rather quickly. And while that's great on its own, that same sense of trust and rash decision-making out of desperation that young people tend to do is what these scammers use to get their money. Not only that, but they also know that many people in this fandom are neurodivergent and may process information differently, and they use that to sweet-talk their way into tricking people into giving them money for nothing in return. It really is a truly disgusting way of taking advantage of people. This is why I want to help you avoid getting scammed in this way. Like I said before, it's not a very difficult process to avoid these scams. A vast majority of doing so is simply knowing what a convention hotel room scam looks like. Now, there are many ways that scammers like to present themselves to try and trick you into giving them your money, and some are a little bit more extravagant than others. But there are a few telltale signs that you can look out for that should lead to some skepticism on whether what they are offering is too good to be true. One that is very easy to spot is if someone is posting that they have rooms reserved at a convention hotel before the room block even opens to the general public. There's essentially no way that these rooms can be legit if the pool of rooms hasn't even opened up for people to book normally. That's kind of the whole point of releasing rooms at a specific date and time, and no one is that privileged enough to somehow backdoor their way into the system and grab rooms to resell them later. But okay, let's say the room block has already been opened and everything is pretty much sold out. Another very obvious red flag is if someone goes out of their way to contact you to try and sell you a room. First of all, from just a logical standpoint, that doesn't really make sense on its own. If the con is selling out of hotel rooms, they're not desperate to fill any extras or leftover rooms, and certainly not desperate enough to go out of the way to contact you about them directly. Those are usually people who either somehow got your contact information from someone else, or did a little bit of social engineering by looking on Twitter for all of those tweets that people like to post showing their disdain for missing out on rooms at a con hotel. Another thing to look out for is if the person who is trying to contact you is even a furry at all. Now, this might sound a little bit weird, but furries have a very specific way of speaking with one another, using our own slang and lingo. If someone tries to tell you that they have a room for a furry convention hotel, but they aren't really a furry, it actually comes out pretty quick. Whether it's a brand new account that was just created using stolen art as the profile picture, or using furry words in ways that don't really make a lot of sense, there's very little chance that someone brand new to this fandom somehow found their way to sell hotel rooms for conventions. That's probably a scammer. Oh, and here's one that I've seen in other contexts that probably carries over to here as well, but sometimes scammers will try to be sneaky and try to not sell you entire rooms, but will try to get you to buy fake discount codes that they say will knock down the price of a hotel room by a little bit, but actually really don't work at all. These are especially sneaky because they don't usually charge a lot for them, so they may look a little bit more harmless, and since it's not an actual room, they're more likely to be trusted by someone desperate to save a little money on a convention hotel room. Though there's two things wrong with that. One, most conventions already heavily discount rooms at their partner hotels. It's rare that there's another discount on top of that. And two, even though the amount they may be asking for that discount code might not be that much, that is still a scammer who at best gets a couple of bucks out of you and at worst captures your payment information to exploit it elsewhere. Don't get it mistaken, a scam is a scam, no matter how much the size of the scam may be. So that's a pretty comprehensive list of how scammers like to attack people looking for rooms at a furry convention hotel. But there are a couple more things to keep in mind just in general when going about acquiring your accommodations for a furry convention. One, remember the official convention channels are the single source of truth when it comes to hotel information. So if you don't want to miss out when they're opening for rooms, turn on the notifications for their posts online so you can follow all the correct directions to put yourself in the best position to get a room. And you can have your own opinions on this. I know I have mine, but if you want to maybe increase your odds of snagging a room, it might be worth paying the sponsor or super sponsor upgraded registration price and use that as a little bit of insurance to get a room. It's not foolproof by any means, but in theory, it should help. Oh, and let's say you missed out on the room booking entirely. For those cons where it's first come, first serve, don't think once the first batch sells out that it's all over. Some people might have their plans changed or canceled at the last minute, so going back and checking the room booking site for openings even after the first day has passed won't be a waste of your time. You might get lucky and take a look right after a room becomes available again, and you could then snag it for your own. And a note for larger cons specifically, they know that the main hotel room goes fast, and many have done their best to accommodate those who may have to stay in a hotel that's further from the convention space itself, providing things like shuttles to and from those two spaces. And I'm not going to sit here and say it's perfect, especially if you have a fursuit, but getting a room at a hotel room further away might be better than not having one at all. Along the same vein, there's also a couple of things to keep in mind when it comes to paying for your room as well. This first one might sound a little bit confusing, but if you can, try to pay for your room with a credit card instead of a debit or a bank card. Why? Well, in short, when you use a credit card, you are spending the bank's money, not your own, meaning your chances of getting it back if you get scammed are a little higher since many credit cards provide purchase protection for their cardholders. Debit or bank cards don't offer those same protections because they are directly tied to your bank account. Once that money goes out from your account, it's pretty much gone. Going along with that, I have not been to a single hotel at a furry convention where they have asked you to pay in full at booking time. Now, there may be some that do this that I don't know about, so it's worth double checking, but what many do is ask for a deposit, maybe one night's worth, and you pay the rest when you arrive and check in. If you end up on a website where you're asked to pay for the entire amount in full up front, I would question that and double check to see if it's legit or not, because unless the convention explicitly says that this is the policy, that should not be the expectation. Oh, and this one should be painfully obvious, but don't use cryptocurrency to get your rooms. If you are asked to pay in crypto for anything in this fandom, no, don't run, sprint away. Switching gears a little bit, one common way that people end up at hotels, even if they didn't get a room themselves, is by rooming with other congoers. And while that is pretty common and something I actually suggest myself, it's still worth being a little cautious about. Especially with these scams on the rise, I would really only room with people you already know and trust that they will either pay you back in full or that they will only ask for your fair share of the room costs. I know one common strategy that's popular in this fandom is to go online and ask around for room openings, and while that can work, I would still vet the person who says that they have an opening in the same way that you would vet a potential scammer. Try to ask around to see if this person is trustworthy, see if they've roomed with other people before, and at the very least, try and talk with them beforehand about the rooming situation and document what you both say so there's a written record of any prior agreements in case there's some sort of dispute. Oh, and this one might be a little personal, but speaking of going online, you really don't need to post that you've missed out on a room after the booking ends. Honestly, all you're really doing is putting a target on your head saying, "Hey scammers, I'm a perfect candidate for you to try and scam me. I'm telling the entire world that I don't have a room and I really want one." But after all of this, at the end of the day, the one thing that you should take away from this video is that if an offer looks too good to be true, it probably is. Look, I get that the current state of room slots at furry conventions is in a tough spot right now, and trust me, the conventions themselves know too. In all honesty, I would offer suggestions on how to fix the problem at its root. In fact, there's a whole video that I wanted to make on it for a while, but every time I go to write it, I just can't come up with a good answer to such a uniquely challenging problem. But one thing I can do is to try and make as many people aware of this hotel room scamming issue as possible and help them try to avoid making a bad situation worse by falling for a scam. There are other options out there for you to take if you don't end up getting a room, and they don't have to involve giving someone you don't know your hard-earned cash for something that might not even be real. So as you go about planning your furry conventions from now into the future, just be a little more cautious when it comes to booking your accommodations. There's nothing worse than ruining your convention experience before you even arrive at the hotel. Alright, that's been it. Thank you for watching. I'll catch you in the next one, but until then, stay safe and stay wild out there. Peace.